you did read the title of this video correctly. I'm going to be showing you not one, not two, but three games by the Napoleon Bonaparte, first consul for life of the First Republic of France, one of the greatest generals to ever live. While these three games, the authenticity is a bit disputed, they are very, very interesting nonetheless. And knowing a bit about the history of Napoleon, you can kind of understand that these games might actually be from him, just from the style. Make sure you stick around for the third game because it is insane. This game is against Madame de Remusat. She is basically like a French scholar. She's a woman as well, so that's pretty. Well, it is pretty big at the time, but France was a bit more equal in that sense in the French Republic. That was, after the French Revolution. It's an interesting point in history. But something I find interesting about Napoleon's play, and something that makes me think that it might actually be him, is he's very well known in the Napoleonic Wars for essentially splitting his forces up into small maneuverable units and being able to outflank the bigger forces of countries like Prussia and Austria-Hungary. And that's kind of what he does in the games that I'm about to show you. So we have e4, knight f6, d3, and e5. Napoleon takes the center. Um, I'm just going to call her Madame because de Rosemat is a. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. We have f4, which is a very good move. She secures her center with d3, so that f4 can strike against e5. And probably you should take here, and after something like bishop takes f4, maybe you go something like knight to c6 because d4 can't be played as the e4 pawn hangs, but it is a little bit difficult for Napoleon to challenge in the center if he takes on f4. So instead he goes for knight to c6, f takes e5, knight takes e5. d4 is absolutely a move here, attacking the knight, and after a move like knight to g6, you can go e5. After something like knight to d5, you might have to be a little bit concerned about moves like queen to h4, because let's say something like c3 is played, then queen h4 check, g3, and queen e4 picks up the rook in the corner. Very, very common idea. So when you play moves like f4 and f3, you have to be very aware of this diagonal. So you should just put a knight on f3, you control the center, you control the h4 square. Everything's pretty good. Although d6 does try to chip away at the center quite nicely. But in the game, knight to c3 is played, and Napoleon blunders with knight f to g4. There is no need to be going quite so aggressively, which is one of the reasons that I feel like it probably is Napoleon, because that kind of just is his style, throwing caution to the wind a little bit. A move like bishop to b4 is perfectly valid here, just challenging the knight, preparing d5 so that the knight's defense on d5 is removed, and also just preparing to castle, maybe putting the rook on the e-file, because when d5 gets played, the e-file could open up very quickly. But no, we have knight f to g4, which creates a bit of a tough situation because the knights are defending each other. So after d4, great move from Madame. I really don't know what to call her. I'm going to call her de Rosemat. I'm going to try. But d4 attacks the knight, and the knight is defending this knight. Because the d-pawn hasn't moved, the knight isn't defended by the bishop. So if you move the knight, you just lose the other one. Superfluous knights is often what they're called, the technical term. Napoleon gives a check on h4. And there is no option but to play g3. If the king moves, the queen gets in, of course. So g3 is played. And Napoleon retreats queen to f6. The knight still can't be taken because queen to f2 is still mate. There are a few choices here for white to defend this threat. One of them, the best move, is bishop to f4, just blocking the queen's access to f2. The knight is still under attack, and if the knight moves, the other knight drops off. The same threat still exists in the position. These knights are still very fragile. A move like queen to e2 can also be played, just defending the f2 square, still attacking the knight. Again, if the knight moves, you take, because then f2 isn't under threat because you take the attacker. Knight to h3 is played. This is a blunder. Now, yes, the knight does defend f2, but the knight on g1 was defending the f3 square, which allows the move knight to f3 check. Checking the king, this is defended by the queen, but the queen also defends this square from the black perspective because the white knight has been removed from the defense. King e2, how do you continue the attack? Find the move. Knight takes d4 check. King is under attack. The pieces are controlling so many of the squares. If the king retreats back to e1, you could repeat, and after king to e2, you'd have to find another way into the position. The computer suggests c6, which is funny, just stopping knight to d5, which would be quite annoying, or knight f to e5. And then if something like this, then I assume the queen just gets into f3. So white would have to play a move like knight to f4, stopping the queen's infiltration, bishop c5, just applying more pressure. Now if knight cd5, just queen to d6, defending the threat. And the white king is just a little bit stranded. The game isn't over, but the white king is stranded. This is not the move that was chosen by Madame de Remusat. She goes king to d3. And here is Napoleon plays a very, very nice combination here. Try and find the move to essentially win the game. Knight e5 check. Attacking the king. Giving the knight up. What if the king doesn't take the knight? The king has two other options. If king to king to e3, the computer likes knight takes c2 check. If the queen takes, then queen to f3. Attacking the rook, attacking the king. If king to d4, c5 check leads to forced mate in a couple of moves. Very, very nice. And if the king instead goes to d2, then knight e to f3 check, so that this knight still covers the e2 square. And after a move like king to e3, again, knight takes c2. And if queen takes c2, bishop c5 check. And the black pieces are just converging on the white king with a fork to follow. I don't think there's any other great squares to go to. Queen a6 check. That's mental. Absolutely mental. Who knows if Napoleon calculated all of that? Regardless, this check is still going to be very strong if the king does not accept the sacrifice. The king does accept the sacrifice, and Napoleon finds a brilliant move to force checkmate in 3. Again, find the move. Bishop c5. Check. The king is cut off from all retreat. He could step forward to d5 and get mated in 1. He instead takes on c5. One move forces mate. Everything else white is better because white is up 2 minor pieces. Queen b6. The knight covers c4. The queen covers all the other squares. I mean, these squares are covered by quite a few pieces. King has to go to d5, and the queen gives mate on d6. Unbelievable game. And the funniest thing is, this game was allegedly played in 1802, which is the year that Napoleon became first consul for life, essentially a dictator. 2 years later, apparently, he plays Madame de Remusat again. And the game is going to look a little bit familiar, because this is exactly the same game as before. Let's just go back real quick. Exactly the same game, except Napoleon puts his pawn on h3 to get exactly the same position, except with a pawn on h3. Goes for the exact same idea with knight f to g5. Again, d5 is winning for black. Goes for this exact same queen idea, and Madame de Remusat goes for the same knight to h6. Again, bishop to f5, queen e7, queen d7, all accomplish the same thing. Somehow, in 2 years, she didn't learn from her mistake, and the exact same sequence happens just from the other side of the board, which is why I'm just going over this game very quickly, because it's basically the same game. Still, very, very cool. But the last game, this is epic. Napoleon is playing the white pieces against one of his generals, Henri Gatien Bertrand. I hope that's how you say it. I did take French GCSE. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. Napoleon plays the Scotch. Knight takes d4 isn't really the move that people play anymore. E takes d4 is better, and after something like knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4, this is all mainline stuff. Very, very theoretical. I used to play this with the black pieces myself, and honestly, I struggled. I honestly did struggle. The Scotch is a very good opening for white. So good choice from Napoleon, but his opponent takes with the knight. Knight takes e5 is absolutely playable. The queen attacks the knight puts pressure on f7, and after a move like knight to e6, bishop c4, white can get some very nice development in this position, and honestly can probably just sacrifice his pawn, because here, yeah, so if this pawn takes, queen takes, king takes, knight f7 check picks up the rook, and if the f pawn takes, then queen h5, g6, knight takes. If the pawn takes, then you can take the rook in the corner. So it's very difficult to play with the black pieces in this kind of position. But Napoleon takes on d4 rather than on e5, which is a bit inaccurate. Well, maybe from a human perspective, but it's still fine. E takes d4. Queen takes d4 is a perfectly good move. Napoleon goes for bishop to c4. Again, this is very much Napoleonic kind of military style, right? Quick movement, aggressive movement, working in kind of small units to create activity. His entire military philosophy was all about speed. And I think that this game really encompasses that. Bishop c5. Now, bishop takes f7 is playable here, attacking the king. And if king takes, queen to h5 check picks up the bishop. Typically, that kind of tactic doesn't exist because normally the knight goes to f6 and covers the h5 square. Napoleon misses this tactic. Again, Napoleon wasn't really a chess player. He was decent at chess, probably because he was just very intellectual and intelligent in general, and probably just knew the rules of the game and played it in a very aggressive style, which is great for us to analyze today. Goes c3. I love this move. Absolutely love this move. If d takes c3, there is again this idea of bishop takes f7 check, or you can check on d5 even. I don't think it makes a difference. But something tells me that wasn't his plan, because if that was his plan, why didn't he play it before? If pawn takes, I actually would expect him to play knight takes, and after a move like d6, there is queen b3 setting up a battery. There's also castling. There's a lot of options in this position. You could I know you couldn't do something like this because of bishop to e6, but I don't know, maybe something like, no, not like that. Apologies. I'm trying to find aggressive moves because the aggressive moves are what I assume Napoleon would have gone for, but his opponent did not take on c3. He played queen to e7. Napoleon castles. This pawn is untouchable because of rook to e1, pinning the queen to the king. Queen e5. Queen e5 is literally just trying to hang on to this pawn at all costs. The issue for black is if you take on c3 and knight to c3, then knight to d5 is quite a big threat, forking the queen and the pawn. Remember, this pawn is still untouchable even if the knight moves, not only because of knight c7 check, but because the rook to e1 idea still very much exists. So if a move like c6 is played to stop knight to d5, there is a gorgeous computer move here, e5. I think the point is to go knight to e4 and try and sneak into d6 because c6 took the eyes off of that square. Of course, you still can't take because of rook e1, and it also stops the knight from developing to f6. And if the knight goes to h6, white always has the option of taking, ruining the pawn structure on the king side for black, and maybe just doing something as simple as queen to h5 to put immense pressure on the black position. And then squares like f6 are accessible to the knight as well. Rook to d1 can also be played to stop any d6 ideas. Beautiful stuff, beautiful stuff. But castles, queen e5. Henri decides to try and defend the d4 pawn. f4. Napoleon goes for it, attacks the queen, and this is actually known as the Napoleon Gambit. this line. I think it starts in this position with bishop to c4. So the fact that it's called the Napoleon Gambit, it may well be a real game. Would not surprise me. The queen is under attack, but d takes c3 check. The bishop is unleashed onto the king because f4 weakens the dark squares. And now, obviously, knight takes c3 can't be played because the king is under attack. King to h1. C takes b2. F takes e5. B takes a1. Sorry, no, he didn't play that. What am I on about? He goes bishop to f7 first, which is a very nice idea because if king takes f7, then f takes e5 comes with check, and then the pawn can be picked up. Whereas if you simply take the queen, then black can promote, and you do have moves like bishop takes f7 check, but the computer thinks that this is completely drawn, prefers to move queen to d5 going after it. Of course, knight to h6, you can just take the knight, remove the defender, and it looks very, very difficult for black to survive in this position. But bishop takes f7, check. Again, the computer doesn't like this because of king to d8, which Henri finds. Just getting the king out of the line of fire. Bishop to g5 ideas don't exist right now because, of course, the bishop is blocked in. F takes e5, b takes a1 queen, and bishop takes g8. Not the best move, but if rook takes g8, then queen d5, attacking the rook and attacking the bishop. It's a fork. Let's say rook e8, queen c5, queen takes b1. Bishop g5. Yes, the queen is under attack with a discovered check, but it's far worse than that because it is just checkmate. Or you can checkmate. Sorry, you can't checkmate like that because the rook is pinned to the king. I'm making a lot of mistakes today. Whatever, doesn't matter. But that doesn't happen. Bishop takes g8. Henri must have noticed this problem and goes bishop to e7 to stop bishop to g5 ideas. Henri is still up a rook. A rook for a pawn? Yeah. Or a rook for 2 pawns. Something like that. He's up a bit of material, but of course this material is doing a whole lot of nothing and the queen is in the corner. Queen b3. The best move in the position played by Napoleon. Defends the knight, defends the a2 square if that's important, but also potentially threatens to come to a square like f7. a5, and the game is lost. Now, the idea of a5 makes a lot of sense, trying to play something like rook to a6 to try and, because he's up material, he wants to try and get his material into the game. Let's say white does a whole lot of nothing here. There is potential for moves like rook to b6 to try and go after the knight. Now, this doesn't work because of moves like bishop to g5, but you don't know why that works yet. Because in this position after a5, Napoleon finds the most forcing line. Pause the video. Rook f8. Check. There is only one move. Now, you could play bishop to g5 in this position. And if bishop takes, then rook f8, king e7, and queen f7 is checkmate. That's why the queen coming to b3 is so good, not only defending the knight, but also queen f7 ideas in the future. Of course, black doesn't have to take. He can play a move like c6, trying to give his king a bit of breathing room after bishop takes e7, king takes e7, rook f7, king d8, queen b6, king e8, rook f8, and if king takes, then queen d8 checkmate. That is very, very cool. But rook f8 is the chosen move, and it's a bit simpler compared to bishop to g5 because there's only one line. You can only take bishop g5. There is 2 moves. Either you get mated on the next move, you can actually just mate with the bishop, which is very aesthetic, or you go bishop e7. Bishop e7, again, if the king moves, it's checkmate. The king has to take. Queen f7, the king only has 1 move. King to d8, and queen to f8 is checkmate. Beautiful game. Quite a few brilliant moves played by Napoleon over these 3 games, but the first 2 are basically the same as each other. Of course, you have in this one bishop to c5, sacrificing the bishop for a forced checkmating sequence. Not, it's not that obvious, to be perfectly honest. The majority of you wouldn't have seen it, most likely. You probably would have moved the knight with some kind of discovered check and thrown the advantage away. I might have done the same. Obviously, the same thing happens in this game, and in this one, the absolutely beautiful rook to f8. Such a nice move. Three really cool games by Napoleon Bonaparte, and there is one more game attributed to Napoleon where he plays against the mechanical Turk. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but if you do want to see that, make sure you let me know in the comments, like and subscribe so I can see that this video is liked. And if you guys do like this video, I will do another one going over Napoleon's game against the mechanical Turk. Really interesting history behind that and a great game. Thank you very much for watching, and click the video here because YouTube thinks that you're really going to like it.